practice does not mean perfect. Justin, what are you actually on about? As you can see, I'm rather into my fitness. And when I first started working out, I was very enthusiastic and I worked out very often. You can't really tell anymore, but many years ago, I was working out 5, 6 times a week. And in particular, my weak point was my squats. It felt so uncomfortable. My hips were always so tight, and I would just continually try to work on it. And then after years of really trying to get this and grind it out, you know what happened? I injured my hip. I spent all of that time practicing, and what did I have to show for it? Bilateral hip impingement. Wow, what a victory. That actually made me stop squatting for over a year, waiting for my hips to heal. And naturally, all the strength gains that I made in the years prior to that, 90% of it just wasted away because I couldn't work out anymore. I couldn't do the exercise because I was in pain. A year later, I started again, and it still felt a little bit niggly. And then about 2 months in, I re-injured my hip in exactly the same way. You'd think I would have learned, right? And then I joined a powerlifting gym, a competitive powerlifting gym filled with some of the strongest athletes in the world. Literally, I was working out next to people that were ranking first, second, third in the world for their weight division. Crazily strong people with really good form. And I paid $50 for a coaching session from one of the members there. $50, not a lot of money. And in about 1 hour, I learned that my form was wrong and had been wrong for years. And it's not like I was just walking into the gym and just throwing weights around. I had watched dozens of hours of YouTube videos. I'm not even kidding. I remember I watched an hour-and-a-half seminar on how to squat, and I still got injured. So either I was terrible at understanding what was in those videos, or there was just some detail, some nuance. It required someone to see me and provide me with something that was a little bit more tailored and a little bit more structured. And so what's the point of the story? Well, the reason I'm telling you this story is to show that sometimes more practice just means you are more wrong. And at a certain point, if you're wrong enough, you undo all of the effort and all of the time that you put in, and fixing it could be as simple as just learning the right way to do it in a focused manner from someone that actually knows how to do it properly. So I'm going to teach you how to practice anything properly without even needing a coach next to you to do this. I'm going to teach you how you can never make the same mistake twice. I'm going to teach you how you can make all of those marginal gains. On that note, by this point, you need to be pretty familiar with marginal gains. You need to understand that marginal gains is an indication of progress. There may still be parts of you that are holding you back in terms of, you still feel like you're not progressing, or it's frustrating, or you're not really used to seeing the marginal gains, but you still have to have another part of you that's fighting that, the part of you that recognizes the small gains that you make towards your goals, the part of you that sees the marginal gain, sees the value in the marginal gain, is able to push through and motivate yourself because you know the marginal gain is there. And even if it doesn't seem outwardly to someone else, or to you if you're not looking in that way, that there is progress being made, you know there is progress made because you have trained yourself to think in marginal gains. It is so important. It's why it's the first thing that we teach you. Well, one of the first things that we teach you. If that's the basis, the next question is, how do we make sure we are making the right marginal gains? And how do we make sure we are gaining productively? Because in theory, a 1% improvement per day seems all good. But how do you know that you're getting 1% in the right direction every day, as opposed to 1% better, 1% worse, 1% better, 1% worse, 1% better, 1% worse? Because if that happens every single day, you legitimately will not improve. And that is the focus of this lesson. This is one of the most important lessons in the entire program. It has been voted. We had a poll on this. It has been voted by thousands of our students as one of the most important, I think it actually was the single most important lesson that was voted for. It is a pillar of importance. If everything that we teach you is how to build and assemble your perfect racing car, this is the fuel that will power that car. Man, it's not even the fuel. It is the fuel, it is the tools, it is the material, it is your actual ability to create the car rather than just wish you could create the car. And I'm really hyping this up a lot, so let's jump into it. We're talking about a concept called reflective experiential practice. Again, riveting names in the educational field, I know. But it is a pretty descriptive process. It's reflective and experiential. One of the fathers of experiential learning is someone called Kolb. And now Kolb is an incredibly famous educational theorist, and he had some ideas that we now know in modern science is not quite how the brain works, but he came up with something called the experiential cycle, and it was novel enough that we named it after him. So it's called Kolb's experiential cycle, and for those of you that are involved in our community, now the light bulb is clicking. Oh, that's what Kolb's is, the thing that people have been talking about the entire time. Yes, we're introducing to you the fabled Kolb's experiential cycle. Now, those of you that are already familiar with Kolb's cycle, listen carefully, because the way we teach Kolb's is very unique. It is very specific for learning these particular cognitive skills that we teach in the program. We realize that the normal version of Kolb's produces a lot of very avoidable errors, so we created a very special version of it. Kolb's experiential cycle is easy to understand. And the idea behind this is that you have some kind of experience, you're going to reflect on that, you're going to figure out how you can do it better, and then you're going to try to do it better. And you're going to repeat that cycle until you fix the issue. Seems very simple. And actually, the core of it is very simple. So let me just lay it out for you so that we're all on the same page. And it goes like this. You can see that we have experience here at the very, very top. And the experience is whatever the experience you're trying to reflect on is. Often it's going to be a technique that you tried, or maybe it's a new type of method or some kind of experiment, something that you felt you wanted to test out, and it either went well, surprisingly well, or it didn't go well. Maybe surprisingly it didn't go well, or maybe you predicted it wouldn't go well and you gave it a go anyway just to see how you can improve it the next time round, which is, if you're doing that, that's a great mindset to have. Anyway, the experience is very, very brief. So you'd normally just write this down. Experience, I try to use a nonlinear note-taking technique in this biology study session, and it was quite difficult. Very simple, usually a one-liner. And the next part is we're mining and collecting data about this experience. So yes, we've said we've had this experience, but it's not really enough. We need more information about this experience to actually extract value from it. It's kind of like if someone comes up to you and they're like, hey, I really need your help. I'm having a problem. And you're like, okay, well, you've told me essentially nothing about this. How can I help? And the answer is you can't unless this person gives you more information. It's the same thing, except you're having a conversation with yourself. It's not enough just to know that there was an experience that went well or didn't go very well. In order to start doing something about it, so to improve it, for example, you need to get information about it. And here's the important part, is that the type of information that you get determines the type of solution you're going to create. Makes sense, right? If your data is really skewed and you're only getting information about this stuff, but there's an entire factor that hasn't been considered, then actually the true solution can be completely missed. So this is the second step, which is the reflection. So a way that I kind of think about this is we're really mining for the relevant information. So relevant information. And now there are many ways that we can reflect on a experience. And contrary to popular belief, not all reflection is actually positive. People will say, reflect more, right? Journal every single night. And I'm not saying that those are bad things, but it doesn't always make it a good thing. So for example, one of the characteristic signs of depression and anxiety is being very reflective. And in fact, there's sometimes too much reflection, and that reflection is not productive. So it's possible to reflect and for that to be harmful if we're not reflecting in the right way, extracting the right information. So if you're reflecting and all you're thinking is, oh, I screwed it up, I did badly, I did this, I feel like, terrible, why, how could I do this? If that's your reflection, there isn't any meaningful data to work with there. You can imagine that if you're in a solution mindset and you've got someone that's got a problem, and we're ignoring the fact that you need to be empathetic and all the other things, and most people don't want solutions when they come to you with it. But let's say for this example, they're saying, I want you to help me find a solution. That's what I want. I have this problem. And you say, okay, tell me about this problem. And they just say, oh, I feel terrible. I tried to do this and it just all went wrong. And I just found that it was so hard and I struggled with it. And this part was it was so challenging, and the challenge made me feel so anxious about it, and it was so just terrible. You don't have any information there to help you actually solve this because you don't know what went wrong. You know how they felt about it. They clearly didn't feel good about this. They felt terrible. But we don't have the information to solve this. And so this is where the type of reflection that we do is very important. And then on top of that, what makes it even more complicated is that our brain has these things called cognitive biases. And we'll add a little bit more information about that below the video for you to look into a little bit more. But the idea is that your brain is wired to think in certain patterns and shortcuts. And this has a survival advantage from an adaptation point of view. It's like an energy saving thing. It allows your brain to make judgments and decisions about certain things that used to be, and I guess in some cases still are, beneficial for us to just live in the daily life. But in some situations, it actually does more harm because it stops us from seeing things objectively. In a way, it biases our thoughts towards something. One of the big ones is confirmation bias. So if you already think something, if you've got a conclusion, you're more likely to seek out and interpret information in a way that confirms what you're already thinking. And so if you're saying, oh, I did this thing wrong, but the reason I did it wrong was because I was distracted at this time. Now, you may have been distracted, or maybe you weren't distracted. Like, it could have been something else. But if you come into it already being like, I already know what the issue is, it's because I was distracted, then when you're reflecting, you're going to be more biased to reflect about the things that support the fact that you were distracted. Even if objectively, truthfully, maybe it was something else, or maybe it was a combination of multiple things. And so therefore, your solution is also going to be biased or sometimes completely incorrect. Realistically, it's not really possible to overcome cognitive bias. And there's a lot of research done on this, and it's a very, very big field. People are looking at overcoming cognitive bias in every single industry, like pilots and medicine, like surgical fields. Cognitive bias in some cases is life or death. It's constantly being worked on. It's a very interesting field. But we know, based on the research that we've got already, it's not easy. There's so much complexity to cognitive bias, and fixing it does not seem like a simple, oh, you just do this and you can turn the bias switch off in your head. It doesn't work that way. One thing that we do know works is having a system or a structure that prevents the bias from occurring. So one thing that is used in air traffic control and pilots, through to the military, through to medicine, these high pressure fields where mistakes are very costly, there are systems, protocols, and checklists. And the reason is not because the surgeon doesn't know how to set up an operating table for the 7,000th time. It's just in case. It's just in case. And so we're doing the same thing with Kolbs. So you'll see that we've got a tool that's there to help you. We've got some resources and some templates. And you'll see that there are certain questions that are asked of you in the reflection. And you may think, these questions don't really seem relevant, or I don't see the purpose of these questions, or you might think that some of the questions might even feel repetitive to you, like it's asking the same thing twice. Trust me, it's actually done deliberately. And in some cases, it's true. Sometimes that question is not going to be relevant. But please, for your own sake, answer it as best as you can, because the questions were designed to prevent cognitive biases from affecting the quality of your reflection. Years ago, when I used to teach this, I didn't have these questions in there. I was just like, reflect more, reflect deeper. And then people would run into all sorts of different issues. over years of coaching, I started realizing that there are certain questions when we ask it during the reflection process, make us think in a certain direction that prevents multiple different cognitive biases from arising, or at least it reduces the risk of it. So please do make sure to go through and use all of those questions. That part is critical, and that is a fairly unique way of doing the reflection that we have designed. By the end of this step, we now have a pretty comprehensive reflection. It's really normal, and you'll see in the exemplars that we've got attached, it's really normal for this reflection, especially in the early stages, to be quite long. And so I would recommend that this Kolb's process, we recommend that you type it. We recommend that you type it because the benefit is not going to be in the free form writing, or you don't have to have this in a non-linear format. You don't need to do that sort of thing. The benefit is actually in following the sequence and just getting the ideas out. So writing it is perfectly fine. And the other benefit is that if you are writing it, it's easier for you to read. You're usually faster at typing it than handwriting it. And also, if you need to get feedback, very, very often, in fact, 99% of the time, if you ask us for feedback on a certain technique, we'll ask for your Kolb's on that technique because it provides us a lot of insight into your perspective, your methodology, your thought process, and that's where the gold is. Without that, it's very, very hard to know what's going wrong just looking at the surface. But when we know what's going on in your mind, plus we see the outcome, we've got a lot of information to work with. If it's typed, it's a lot easier for us to read and give you feedback on. So I would recommend typing it. In fact, actually keeping a log of it. A lot of people have sort of Notion templates or Google Docs or spreadsheets. Doesn't really matter what app or software you use, just keep it documented. So we've got this reflection, pretty long, pretty broad, covering all of those points, trying to get into that critical depth. The next step is abstraction. This is figuring out what is going wrong at the root cause. So it's the reflection was about mining the experience for the relevant data and information. The abstraction is about looking at all of this resource, this material and information to work with, and finding the trends and the patterns. So the abstraction here is really something of an analysis. We're fundamentally trying to answer the question, why is it that I had this experience? We said this is the experience. We reflected on the characteristics, the nature, the triggers, the antecedents, the possible additional external factors. We reflected on all those aspects of the experience. We've got the data there. We're going to look through that data and say, okay, based on this information, what is the root cause reason that I had this experience in the first place? And you do not have to be correct. Most of the time, at best, it is going to be an observational hypothesis. Let me say it again. It's an observational hypothesis. What does that mean? Two big words. Hypothesis, as in we're sort of making an estimate. We're making a prediction. We think it could be this, but we're not sure. It's kind of like an idea in a way. And it's something that we need to test. Hypotheses are things that we need to test. What's the observational part? This is critical. We don't want our abstraction to be theoretical. A theoretical abstraction is when we've said, okay, so here's the experience that I had, and I think it's because of this. So I reckon it's because of this. We don't want to start thinking and pulling ideas out from just what we think or what we believe because of two things. Number one, we're fully subjected to our cognitive biases then. There's no system or filter that stops us from just thinking it's because of something else. And often when we see theoretical abstractions, what we see is that the reflection and the abstraction are like completely separate. They've reflected on all this stuff, and then out of the blue, they're like, oh, but I think it's because of this. And it's like, there's no evidence to show that in the reflection. All the information about this experience does not lead me to suggest that this is the real issue. So it makes us much, much, much more error prone, significantly more error prone, to the point where it's kind of, in a way, a waste of time doing it that way. And the second reason is because it's unlikely that the thought that you have is going to be accurate if it is a complex problem that you're facing. because the thought or the idea you have is always going to be limited by your own insight. So you will only be able to think of ideas based on what you already know. But if the root cause of the problem is something that you have yet to discover, then you would never be able to think of that in the first place. You see, it's a chicken and egg situation. This is a reason we want to be observational. We want to look through the reflection and look for hints. I felt this way when this and this happened. And then I felt this way when this thing happened. And then you'll see in the abstraction, the questions that we ask of you in the abstraction section, they're geared towards helping you find and extract all of those patterns. We're looking for transferable approaches, perspectives, beliefs, habits that you have that made that reflection occur, that made that experience that you reflected on occur. These are trends in your behavior, trends and patterns and habits in the way you tend to engage in that type of experience that led you to this. If when you're doing your abstraction, you do not feel you have enough information from your reflection to find trends and patterns, you need to go back to your reflection and fill it out even more. And again, it's actually very normal for your reflection to be quite long initially. It's also very normal for this entire process to be very time consuming when you first start. There are some people that say that the first time they do that, it takes them hours. It's not a good thing that it takes hours, but it's one of those necessary evils. Like, this is such an important skill to learn. If you did not learn how to do this correctly, the detriment it would have on your rate of improvement, it's not comparable at all. I mean, there are some people that are really bad at doing this. They are progressing literally 10 to 20 times more slowly than someone that is doing this diligently and doing it well. Enormous difference. Like, there are people that within 1 week solve problems that take other people months. Completely not exaggerating here. It's such a powerful technique that even if it does take hours, I know that in reality that's very, very difficult to sometimes fit that in, and you might only be able to do that like once or even, twice a week. But I would still recommend that you do it. It will get faster, you'll get better, and eventually it should only take 15 to 20 minutes at most, but for a while it might take longer. Then as you get used to thinking about it in the right way, it just gets easier and easier to just pinpoint on the exact things. And actually at a certain point, you almost don't even need to do this anymore but I'm talking about, this is like years. Once you've been doing this, I did this maybe 2-3 times a day for 4 or 5 years before I just stopped doing it. I'm not saying that you need to do it for that long. No one coached me on how to do it. I was figuring out a lot of things. For you, you might only have to do it for like 6-9 months, a year, a couple years. But at a certain point, you will naturally start thinking about difficulties in this way, where you will be able to do this entire cycle just literally during the experience, because you're just naturally thinking that way because you practice it so much. But like any habit, requires a high volume of practice. Anyway, coming back to the extraction. So we've got the experience, we've got all this information, we're finding trends, we're observing, we're seeing how we can find all these patterns. If we can't find these patterns, we need to go back and add more information to the reflection until we can start seeing that trend and seeing that pattern. If you're getting stuck at this stage, if you really can't see any patterns, the issue is with your self-awareness. Self-awareness is the step before being reflective. Self-awareness is being able to collect data in the moment, in the experience. So, for example, if you have very poor emotional self-awareness, you won't know how you feel in an experience because you weren't aware of it at the time, or you won't be able to label it. So an hour or two at the end of the day, when you're reflecting on the experience and it says, well, how did you feel? You won't actually know, you won't remember, or you won't be able to label it because you actually didn't take that data in at the time because you didn't have that awareness. So sometimes the marginal gain of this technique in the early stages is just having enough self-awareness so that you can do a good enough reflection so that you can even do an abstraction for the first time. That is a major win though. If you go from not being able to do an abstraction to being able to do a good abstraction, from a metacognitive standpoint, that is a major win. If you ask any metacognitive scientist or cognitive scientist out there, training someone to have self-awareness to get to the point of abstraction, that is a huge jump. So do not underestimate that as a milestone gain. If you're already pretty self-aware, then you may be able to have that reflection and get the abstraction straight away. Again, it's probably not going to be right. It's just going to be a hypothesis that you have observed. Based on this, the final step is the experimentation. So in the experimentation, again, what we're doing is we're following on from the previous one. So like how reflection follows from experience and abstraction follows from the reflection, the experiment follows from the abstraction. They lead to the other. That's why there's arrows here, obviously. We've observed and made a hypothesis about what might be the cause of this experience that we've had. Now we're going to design an experiment, something that we can just trial out to see if that helps the situation. And again, it's a hypothesis. We could be either right or we could be wrong. The experiment could help or it could not help. Either way, we're gaining data. We are learning about what works or what doesn't work. And that's more information to refine that hypothesis. The experiment should be actionable. It's not, your reflection and your abstraction could be, multiple paragraphs. Your experiment is very focused. Number one, do this. They have to be action points. You want to avoid, if at all possible, having an experiment that is just like, oh, I'm just going to try harder. It's okay if it's the first time that you've realized something. For example, if you're doing nonlinear note-taking, it didn't go so well, you struggled with it, you reflected on it, and after reflecting on it, you realized that the point of struggle was when you started doing higher order thinking with 4 or more concepts, and so your hypothesis there is that you're not really able to tolerate that level of cognitive load, and so your experiment there might be, I'm going to try only doing it and grouping for 3 concepts at a time, rather than expanding to 4 until I feel more comfortable. Like, that would be a great experiment. And yes, it may help or it may not help. But if you're doing that as your experiment, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to just try to do 3 instead of 4, if the experiment is instead, when I feel that it's getting overwhelming, I'm going to do my best to just push through, to try harder, to persevere. It's not a bad experiment if it's your first time. You never realized that you were actually pulling back. You were getting overwhelmed and you were pulling back. You were deciding, oh, I'm not going to do this anymore. Maybe you never realized that you were doing that. So now you want to just try to push through. That's okay. But then if you've already tried that, if you're already aware of it, you already tried to push through, and then it still did not work. And now you're reflecting on it for the second time. Do not do the same experiment again. The answer is not, okay, well, I'm going to try even harder. That's not going to work. Okay, well, it might, but it's a very, very low chance it's going to work. And so that's something that we call an intention experiment. An intention experiment is where it's not very actionable. It simply revolves on you intending, usually, to try harder. So again, if it's the first time that you've become aware of the problem, just trying harder is not a bad thing. But if you've tried harder and then it still hasn't worked, don't just try harder again. You want it to be more actionable. So instead of saying, I'm going to try harder, be like, okay, let's actually do this differently. I'm going to structure my studying differently so I don't run into that problem. I'm going to remove a trigger. I'm going to change my environment. I'm going to change my pacing. I'm going to change the order. I'm going to change the number of concepts. I'm going to change my note-taking. Something needs to change actionably to make it more realistic. Otherwise, it can be very demotivating because you're going to try harder and harder and harder and harder and harder, and it's never going to work. And then eventually you're just going to give up. We see that all of the time. So intention experiments, generally avoidable if this is your second time round. You also don't want to have too many experiments. Try to keep your experiments to at most 3 things that you're working on. This is a pretty loose rule. The idea is that you want to be able to focus on your experiment and not lose track of what you're meant to be working on. If you've got one pretty major thing that you think you need to experiment on, that's enough. You don't need to be mining for more. Yes, you may be able to find 20 to 30 experiments that you could do from a single reflection. Great. Your reflective abstraction ability is amazing. That's good. That's a skill. That's a strength. However, it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to execute on 30 to 40 simultaneous experiments at the same time. That's going to be overwhelming, and then you're going to lead to failure. Stick with prioritizing. If you've got too many, find and funnel it down to just 1, 2, or 3 at most. You never want to feel like there's even remotely too many experiments for you to remember what you're meant to be doing at any point. You want to be very, very focused. If you can work on a single issue every day, you will improve extremely fast. Believe me. And the reason is, even if you have 30 issues, some solutions will fix other issues as well. So you might have 30 issues, but there might be one experiment where if you can succeed with that, it actually removes 7 other problems. So it's not like you've got 30 things that you need to work on, and therefore it's going to take you like 30 months to work on it, one thing per month. You might have 30 things to work on, and in the first month, you might be able to crack out half of that list with 6 experiments. So it's very hard to predict that, but what we can predict is that if you overload yourself, and again, we call this experimentation overload, you are not likely to be able to succeed on all of them. It's that saying, you chase 2 hares and you catch none of them. You try to do more than 3 experiments, all of them are likely to blow up in your face. The only exception is if those experiments are very, very easy to do. Like, they are effortless for you to do, like optimizing one thing in your environment. That's the type of thing where once you do it, it's just done. It doesn't take effort to continually think about doing it. If the experiments are super, 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 super easy, then you can do more than 3. But even then, more than 5, and I'll be like, it's a red flag. Try not to go there. If at all possible, keep your experiments narrow. The next part is the arrow between experiment and the next experience. This part in itself is the secret part to Kolb's. Kolb's experiential learning cycle. It is a cycle. One of the biggest problems that we see is something that we call non-cyclical Kolb's. Why is the cycle important? The cycle is important because you're testing a hypothesis. If you test a hypothesis, you think this is the reason something is going wrong. You do an experiment, and then it doesn't fix the issue, which it probably won't in most of the situations. You have to do multiple cycles to really figure out the nature of the issue enough to then fix it. Well, if you never repeat that cycle, you're never going to actually solve anything. If every single time you do a Kolb's, it's a new problem, you're never going to fix any of them. So each Kolb's should cycle into the next Kolb's. You do an experiment, and then you reflect on that experiment. So the experience of the next cycle is, in fact, the experiment from the previous cycle. So this is actually one and the same. And this is a part that is often very overlooked, and it can cause a lot of frustration and confusion. There are so many times that students will do a Kolb's and they'll do they're very diligent with their Kolb's. They're doing a Kolb's like every single day, but they're not actually improving. And then they're getting very frustrated because they're doing Kolb's and they're using the right technique, but they're not improving. And when we look at it, it's because every single day they're working on a new problem, right? They're working on a new problem. And think about the marginal gains. If you're 1% every single day, okay, that's fine. But this is 1% a day on a different thing. You're never letting it compound. And so we're never actually seeing any of that improvement. And that's very demotivating. So the final part is to make sure that it's always cycling into the next one. Again, when you're first starting, it's very normal for there to be so many things that you want to work on that you're very impatient and you just want to work on all of those at the same time. And it's great that you're so keen to improve, but we have to be realistic. There is a limit to how much you can do self-development at any given time. Otherwise, the trick would just be like find 1,000 things for you to work on and just fix them overnight. Like, we know that's not going to work. So where's the line? Can we do 100 things at one time and fix them? Probably not. Can we do 20? Probably not. Can we do 10? Probably not. In my experience, more than 3 is where it starts becoming overwhelming. And honestly, most of the time I'd recommend 1 or 2. When I do one-on-one coaching, most of the time when I leave the student with some action points to work on, I'm only giving them 1 or 2 action points because those are the most important things for them to work on.